The city of Relanfor burned under a red sky. Towers once shining with crystal light now stood as black, twisted skeletons. Smoke rolled through the streets like ghosts. Carrying the sound of distant gunfire and the cries of the wounded, alien soldiers of the Zath Dominion ran through the ruins, their armor cracked, their weapons shaking in their hands. But they weren't running from lasers or explosions. They were running from humans. Stories had spread across every world. Humans, the monsters of the Outer Rim, the ghosts of the old wars, fought like no other species. They didn't stop when they were hurt. They didn't beg for mercy. They didn't fear death. And now they were here. Private Kethar, a young Zath soldier, pressed his back against a half-broken wall. His breathing was fast and shallow. The red glow of fire danced across his trembling hands. His commander's voice echoed through his helmet radio. "Hold the line. If you see a human, shoot first. Don't let them get close." Kethar wanted to obey, but his claws shook too much to hold his rifle steady. Every explosion made his heart jump. He could hear the heavy, rhythmic thump of human boots approaching through the smoke. Then he heard it, a low human voice, calm and steady, cutting through the chaos. "Over here. There's a survivor." Kethar slowly peeked over the edge of the rubble. Through the smoke, he saw something that didn't make sense. A human soldier was kneeling beside a small Zath child. The child's leg was burned, eyes wide with pain and fear. The human, tall, armored, helmet reflecting the firelight, was not attacking. He was helping. The human reached into a medical pack, pulling out a small silver injector. He pressed it against the child's leg and the bleeding stopped instantly. "It's okay," the human said softly, his voice calm like water. "You'll be all right." The human gently lifted the alien child into his arms, shielding them from falling ash. He didn't look around for enemies. He didn't seem afraid. He just kept whispering comforting words, even though the child couldn't understand his language. Kethar froze. His training screamed, "Shoot him, now." But something stronger held him still. The story said humans were monsters, yet this one was risking his life, one for a stranger. For an enemy. Kethar's commander shouted again through the radio, voice sharp and angry. "Kethar, report." "What do you see?" Kethar's mouth opened, but no words came out. He watched as the human medic placed the Zath child behind a wall, covering them with his jacket before standing up again. Another human soldier appeared, his armor blackened with soot. "You're wasting time, Torres," the second human said. "Command wants us to push forward." The medic, Torres, shook his head. "Then they can wait. I don't leave kids to die." The other human grumbled, looking around nervously. "You're going to get yourself killed for one of them." "Maybe," Torres replied. "But if saving one life costs me mine, it's worth it." The words hit Kethar harder than any blast. He had seen his own commanders leave wounded soldiers behind without a second thought. He had been told that mercy was weakness, that survival mattered more than anything, but this human was different. A sound of approaching footsteps pulled Kethar back. His commander and two other Zath soldiers were coming down the street, weapons raised. "Human sighted," the commander roared. Torres turned instantly, pulling the child close, using his own body as a shield. The commander aimed, and Kethar moved before he could think. "Wait," Kethar shouted, stepping into the open. The commander froze, confused. "Kethar, what are you doing? Move aside." Kethar's heart pounded. His mind screamed at him to run, to hide, but his voice shook as he said, He's helping us, sir. Helping us? Are you insane? That's a human." But the human didn't raise his weapon. Instead, he slowly lifted his hands, showing he was unarmed. The alien child clung to his chest, still trembling. For a long moment, no one moved. Only the sound of fire crackling filled the air. Then another explosion hit nearby, a shockwave throwing dust and debris everywhere. When Kethar opened his eyes, the human was gone, vanished into the smoke. The commander cursed and signaled retreat. The squad pulled back, limping through the shattered street. But Kethar stayed behind for one last look. In the distance, he saw footprints, one large pair and one small. The human had taken the child to safety. The young soldier whispered to himself, his voice low and shaken. "Why would they save one of us?" The smoke swallowed his words as the city continued to burn. For the first time in his life, Kethar wondered if everything he'd been told about humans was wrong, and somewhere beyond the clouds, The human dropships were descending again, not for conquest, not for glory, but for something far stranger, something the galaxy had never understood about Earth's warriors. The next morning, the city of Reland 4 lay under a dark, silent sky. Smoke still rose from broken towers, drifting like gray ghosts. The air smelled of metal, ash, and blood. Private Cathar sat in the ruins of what used to be a market. Around him, other Zath soldiers were patching wounds, whispering about what had happened the night before. They all spoke the same name: humans. No one really knew how many had landed or where they came from. Some said they were mercenaries. Others believed they were revenge troops from the old wars. But everyone agreed on one thing: wherever they walked, the battlefield changed. Cathar couldn't forget what he had seen. A human medic risking his life to save a Zath child. He replayed it again and again in his mind, trying to understand. His commander, Captain Voran, broke the silence. "We regroup at the South Ridge. The humans have taken the northern sector. If they move farther, we'll strike." Cathar nodded but said nothing. As they marched through the ruins, he saw things that made his confusion grow worse. Human medics were everywhere, not killing but helping. One alien civilian after another was being carried from collapsed buildings by human soldiers. They gave them water, bandaged wounds, even shared their food packs. Some Zath soldiers aimed their rifles, unsure whether to attack or watch. But the humans didn't fight back, not unless fired upon. A small Zath officer beside Cathar muttered, "They're pretending. It's a trick. They want us to drop our guard." Cathar wasn't sure anymore. He could still see the child's face, scared but alive because of a human. When they reached a destroyed street intersection, the smell of burned metal filled the air. Something shiny caught Cathar's eye, a broken piece of armor, human armor. He picked it up. It was dented, covered in black soot, but there was a name etched on the side. Torres. His chest tightened. The same human medic, the one who saved the child. Without thinking, Cathar began to look around for any sign of him. Tracks, footprints, anything. Captain Voran saw him and snapped, "Private! Stay in formation." "Sir," Cathar said quietly, "there may be survivors here." Survivors? Humans, maybe. Let them burn. They started this war. Cathar wanted to argue, but his throat felt dry. He couldn't explain what he had seen. No one would believe him. That night, while the rest of the unit set up camp near the southern ridge, Cathar couldn't sleep. The firelight flickered across his face as he stared into the dark ruins beyond. He heard distant voices, human ones. They were faint but clear. Curiosity pulled him forward. He moved quietly, careful not to alert his squad. He followed the sound through collapsed walls and dust-filled streets until he reached the remains of a warehouse. Inside, under a cracked roof, a group of human soldiers gathered around a holographic map. Their armor was battered, faces tired, but their eyes burned with determination. One voice stood out, calm, strong, familiar. It was Torres. "We've got civilians trapped under Sector 9, Torres said. "Zath soldiers, too. We go in at dawn," another human argued. "Command says leave them. They're enemies." "Then Command can find someone else," Torres said coldly. "I'm not leaving anyone to die, human or not." The room went quiet. Even the humans seemed unsure how to respond. Cathar's hands trembled. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Humans were planning to rescue Zath soldiers, the same people fighting them. Why? What kind of soldiers risked their lives for enemies? Suddenly, a small rock slipped under Cathar's foot, clattering across the floor. The human guards turned instantly, aiming their rifles toward the shadows. "Movement! Show yourself!" One shouted. Cathar froze, holding his breath. Torres raised a hand. "Wait. Lower your weapons." He stepped closer, his flashlight cutting through the smoke, landing on Cathar's frightened face. "You again," Torres said softly. Cathar's throat went dry. "You saved that child." "Yeah," Torres said. "And I'd do it again." "Why?" Cathar asked, voice shaking. "Why help your enemies?" Torres looked tired, his armor cracked, his eyes reflecting both anger and sadness. "Because war makes us forget who we are," he said quietly. "I'm not here to destroy a planet. I'm here to stop people from dying." Before Kethar could answer, a loud explosion ripped through the warehouse walls. Flames burst inward. Human soldiers dove for cover. "Ambush!" someone shouted. Zath artillery had locked on their position. Shells rained down like thunder. Kethar was thrown to the ground, ears ringing. Through the smoke, he saw Torres dragging a wounded human toward safety. Without thinking, Kethar ran forward and grabbed the other side of the stretcher. Together, they pulled the soldier behind a wall. "You're insane," Torres gasped. "You'll get shot helping us." "So are you," Kethar said. "You helped us first." For a brief second, their eyes met. Two soldiers from opposite worlds, but the sun never truly rose over Relon 4. Only a dull red light filtered through the thick smoke that covered the sky. The city looked like a dead world, but inside its ruins, life still struggled to survive. Sergeant Torres and Private Kethar crouched behind a broken transport vehicle at the edge of the old industrial sector. The ground shook every few seconds from distant blasts. In the distance, faint cries echoed under collapsed towers. Trapped soldiers. Trapped civilians. "Sector 9, Torres said, checking his scanner. "That's where the signals are strongest." Kethar glanced at the horizon. His scales were dark with soot, his armor dented and cracked. "You sure we'll find survivors there?" Torres looked at him and smiled faintly. "We'll find someone." "That's enough." They moved quickly through the ruins, human and alien side by side. The silence between them was heavy but not unfriendly. Kethar watched how Torres moved, always scanning for danger, always calm. He didn't understand how humans could look so confident when the world around them was falling apart. When they reached a destroyed plaza, they found the first survivors, a group of Zath civilians trapped under a collapsed bridge. The air was thick with dust. A child cried weakly, calling for help. Without hesitation, Torres threw down his weapon and ran forward. "Help me lift this beam," he shouted. Kethar followed, using his strength to push against the heavy metal. It groaned, then moved just enough for Torres to pull the trapped civilians out. One of the alien mothers stared at the human medic, eyes wide. Why would you save us?" Torres wiped sweat from his forehead. "Because you're alive," he said simply. "That's reason enough." Kethar looked at him in silence. Every answer this human gave seemed too simple. Yet it felt right. They gave the rescued group water and directed them toward a safe zone. But Torres didn't stop. "We keep moving," he said. "There are still more signals ahead." An hour later, the streets grew darker and quieter. Thick smoke hung low, hiding everything beyond a few meters. As they passed a shattered wall, Kethar heard faint clicking. Not human, not Zath. He froze. "Something's here," he whispered. Torres raised his weapon. From the shadows, a small drone swarm drifted out. Automated Zath defense bots gone rogue after the last bombardment. Their targeting lenses glowed red. "Down!" Torres shouted. Energy bolts tore through the air. Kethar fired back, his plasma rifle sparking. Torres dove behind cover, returning fire with precise bursts. The fight was fast and brutal. A drone exploded above them, raining sparks. Another hit the ground near Kethar, slicing his arm open with a glancing shot. He groaned, clutching the wound. Torres immediately crawled over, ignoring the blast flying past. "Hold still," Torres said, pressing a coagulant patch over the wound. "You're in the middle of a fight," Kethar protested. "And you're bleeding. Now shut up and breathe." Kethar laughed weakly despite the pain. "You humans are insane." "Maybe," Torres replied, firing one-handed at the last drone. "But it works." The final bot exploded in a flash of light. Silence returned, broken only by their heavy breathing. Torres checked Kethar's arm. "You'll live." Kethar nodded, staring at the human. "You could have left me. Saved yourself." "That's not how we're built," Torres said simply. They pressed on through the ruins until they reached a collapsed power station. The scanner beeped louder, several life signs below ground. "They're under us," Torres said. "We'll need to dig them out." Kethar looked around. "With what?" "We've got no tools." Torres pointed to a cracked service hatch. "That leads down. We crawl." Without waiting for agreement, he kicked the hatch open and climbed into the darkness. Kethar followed. The tunnel below was narrow and filled with dust. Their flashlights flickered. Somewhere ahead, muffled voices called for help. "This way!" Torres shouted. They found 5 Zath soldiers trapped behind a collapsed wall, air running out fast. One of them stared in disbelief. "Humans?" he hissed. They sent humans? Kethar stepped forward. They didn't send him, he said. He came on his own. The trapped soldiers looked from Kethar to Torres, confusion and shame mixing on their faces. Torres ignored their questions and began clearing debris. Less talking, more digging. Together they worked for nearly an hour. Sweat dripped from both their faces, claws and hands bleeding from the effort. Finally, a gap opened. Enough for the trapped soldiers to crawl through. One of them collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. We thought you were devils. Torres gave him a tired grin. We get that a lot. As they prepared to leave, the ground suddenly rumbled. A deep vibration shook the tunnels. The emergency lights flickered red. What now? Kethar muttered. Torres looked at his scanner. His face turned pale. Orbital strike. They're bombing the entire sector. A low roar filled the air, like thunder growing closer. The ceiling began to crack. Move! Torres shouted. They ran through the tunnels as explosions tore the world above them apart. Dust and fire rained from the ceiling. One Zath soldier stumbled. Torres turned back and pulled him up. Keep running! They burst out of the tunnel into the open street, or what was left of it. Buildings burned. The sky was full of falling debris. A massive explosion threw Torres and Kethar to the ground. When Kethar opened his eyes, his ears rang, and everything spun. He looked over and saw Torres lying on the ground, his armor cracked, blood running down his face. Torres! Kethar crawled to him. Stay with me. Torres coughed, trying to push himself up. We're not done yet. Above them, more ships streaked across the sky, Zath bombers following orders from orbit. They were wiping out everything, human, alien, civilian, and it didn't matter. Kethar clenched his fists. They're killing everyone. My people, your people, all of us. Torres gritted his teeth. Then we stopped running. He looked up at the burning sky. We survive. We tell them the truth. He tapped his radio, voice weak but steady. This is Sergeant Torres. To any human units in range, we have survivors on both human and Zath. Request immediate evac. Static. Then a faint voice answered. Copy that, Sergeant. One dropship inbound. Hold tight. Kethar stared at him. You called them here? They'll shoot me! Torres smirked. Not if I tell them you saved my life. The roar of engines grew louder above. A human dropship broke through the smoke, flying low under heavy fire. Its metal hull gleamed through the ash, defiant and brave. Kethar shielded his eyes as it landed roughly a few meters away. The back ramp opened. A voice shouted from inside, Get in! We don't have much time. Torres pushed himself up, limping toward the ship. Move, Kethar, go. But Kethar hesitated, staring back at the burning city. At everything he'd ever known now turned to ash. If I go with you, my own people will call me a traitor. Torres turned to him, eyes steady. Or maybe they'll call you what you are, brave. Another explosion shook the ground. Kethar made his choice. He grabbed Torres by the arm and helped him into the dropship. As the ramp closed and the ship lifted off, Kethar looked down at Relanfur at the flames, at the ruins filled with both human and Zath dead, and whispered to himself, everything we were told about humans was a lie. The human dropship cut through the burning skies of Relanf, shaking violently under enemy fire. Flames licked the hull as plasma bolts streaked past. Inside, everything rattled. Loose metal, medkits, and hearts beating fast. Sergeant Torres sat strapped to a seat, his left arm bleeding from shrapnel. Beside him, Kethar gripped the edge of the seat with trembling claws, watching through a small side window as the city below disappeared beneath clouds of black smoke. The pilot shouted from the cockpit, We've got fighters on our tail. Hold on, Torres groaned. Can you lose them? Not unless you can fly through a mountain. The ship jerked violently as another blast hit their engine. Warning lights flashed red across the cabin. We're losing altitude, the pilot screamed. Brace for impact. Kethar's claws dug into the seat as the ship spun. The world turned upside down. Then came the crash and a deafening explosion of metal and dirt. The dropship skidded across the rocky plain and slammed into a ridge, coming to a smoking stop. For a long moment, everything was silent. Then Torres coughed and unbuckled his straps. Everyone still breathing? The pilot didn't answer. The co-pilot was gone. Only Kethar stirred beside him, coughing up dust. You alive? Torres asked. Kethar nodded weakly. Barely. The ship's hull groaned, metal twisting in the heat. Torres tried the comm, but it only spat static. No contact, no rescue. We're cut off, he said quietly. Outside, the red horizon burned endlessly. The crash site lay deep in the wastelands. No cities, no help. Just scorched ground and shadows. By nightfall, they built a small camp beside the wreck. The wind howled through the wreckage, carrying the smell of burnt fuel and death. Torres wrapped his wounded arm with a torn cloth. Kethar watched silently, unsure what to say. Finally, he spoke. Your people will come back for you. Won't they? Torres gave a tired smile. They always do. We don't leave our own behind. Kethar looked down at the dirt. My army would have left me. Torres glanced at him. That's a sad thing to admit. It's the truth, Kethar said softly. The Dominion doesn't save soldiers. Only victories. Torres stared into the small campfire. The flames flickered across his face, reflecting the weight of the day. That's the difference, then, he said. Humans don't fight for victories. We fight for people. Kethar tilted his head. Even enemies? Torres looked up at the stars, voice calm. Especially enemies. He bunker walls shook. A deep low rumble echoed from far above, like thunder crawling through metal. Sergeant Torres opened his eyes, heart racing. Dust fell from the ceiling as another tremor passed. Kethar stood near the doorway, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. They found us, he whispered. Torres pushed himself up, still weak. How far? Kethar listened carefully, his alien hearing sharper than any human's. Close. Maybe 5 clicks. Heavy troop transports. Torres's chest tightened. Then they must have traced the signal. He turned toward the old console, its light still blinking. The signal that saved them. Had doomed them too. We need to move, Kethar said urgently. Now. Torres shook his head. If we leave the open ground, they'll spot us from the air. We hold here long enough for extraction, Kethar frowned. And if they come before your people? Torres gave a tired grin. Then we make sure they regret it. Outside, on the cracked horizon, the Zath gunships arrived. Sleek black crafts gliding low, their engines howling like beasts. Dust storms followed them, swallowing the wasteland in red mist. From orbit, human satellites caught the movement. A warning flashed across command screens aboard the UHS Resolute, the nearest human cruiser in the sector. In the command deck, Lieutenant Mara Quinn read the alert. They're under attack, she said quietly. Her superior turned toward her. We have no clearance to enter Zath airspace, Lieutenant. The Council made that clear. Quinn stared at the display. 2 life signs, 1 human, 1 alien. If we wait, they'll both die. Orders are orders, she looked him dead in the eyes. Then consider this a mistake in navigation. Before anyone could stop her, she stormed to the hangar. Down on Reel and Fur, the ground trembled again as Kethar loaded the last of the rifle charges. Torres leaned against the bunker wall, trying to stay upright. You should go, he said. They'll spare you if they see you surrender. Kethar turned sharply. After what I've seen? After what you've done? No, Torres frowned. You're risking your life for a human you barely know. Kethar's voice was calm. Not for you, for what you showed me. Compassion. Outside, the wind grew louder. And then came the scream of engines overhead. The Zath gunships had arrived. Beams of plasma tore into the sand, exploding near the bunker. The entrance blew apart, throwing both soldiers backward. Heat and smoke filled the room. Kethar roared and fired back blindly, hitting one gunship's wing. The craft spun, crashed into the dunes, and burst into flames. Nice shot, Torres coughed, trying to reload. But for every gunship that fell, 2 more came. They're surrounding us, Kethar shouted. Good, Torres said through gritted teeth. Easier to hit. The sky turned red as plasma bolts filled the air. From above, Zath soldiers dropped from hovercrafts, armored, disciplined, weapons drawn. They marched toward the wreckage like shadows. Inside the bunker, Torres pulled a small device from his belt, a flare beacon. This'll guide the extraction, he said, flicking it on. A bright blue beam shot into the sky, cutting through the dust storm. Kethar's eyes widened. You're giving away our position. Torres smiled faintly. They already know where we are. I'm just giving my people a target to aim for. And far above the clouds, a single human ship, the UHS Sparrow, picked up that signal. Lieutenant Quinn's voice echoed through comms. Hang on, Sergeant. I see you. The first rescue pass came fast. The Sparrow dove through the clouds, weapons blazing. Missiles streaked through the air, striking the Zath gunships mid-flight. Fire rained from the sky. Kethar stared in awe. "That's one ship?" Torres smiled weakly. "Yeah, just one." But the Zath weren't giving up. Heavy cannons opened from the ridges, launching plasma spheres that ripped the air apart. One struck near the Sparrow, shaking it violently. Quinn gritted her teeth. Shields dropping. "We can't stay long?" "Then don't," her co-pilot warned. But she ignored him. "Lower the ramp. We're getting them out." Below, the Sparrow came down through fire and smoke. The landing ramp hit the ground with a metallic thud. Torres and Kethar ran through the chaos, bullets hissing past. Explosions painted the desert red. "Go, go," Quinn shouted from the ramp. Kethar reached first, pulling Torres up behind him. But a blast struck nearby, throwing them both off balance. Torres hit the ramp hard. Kethar turned to help him, but a Zath soldier appeared from the smoke. Rifle aimed. He hesitated for a split second, staring at Kethar, a traitor to his kind. The alien's claw tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, a human sniper beam from the Sparrow hit him square in the chest. He dropped instantly. Torres yelled, "Move!" and they stumbled inside as the Sparrow's engines roared. The ship shot upward, climbing fast, fire trailing behind. In the cockpit, Quinn's hands flew over the controls. "We're clear, hold on!" Behind her, Kethar looked out the window, the wasteland below burning under the Zath's fury. He turned to Torres. "They'll call you heroes for this." Torres shook his head. "No, we just survived." "Then what am I?" Kethar asked quietly. Torres smiled faintly. "Proof that enemies don't have to stay enemies." For a moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of the engines filled the cabin, and the hum of two soldiers who should have never fought side by side, but did. As the Sparrow reached orbit, new alerts flashed on the human fleet's scanners, dozens of Zath ships leaving their planets. Heading straight for human space, the rescue had broken more than laws. It had broken a fragile peace. And as the crew of the Sparrow looked out at the stars, the reality settled in. This wasn't the end of their story. It was the start of a new war. One born not from hate but from a single act of kindness. The UHS Sparrow drifted in low orbit above the burned world of Relon 4. Inside the medical bay, soft lights flickered. The air smelled of metal and antiseptic. Sergeant Torres lay on a cot, bandaged from chest to shoulder. He winced as the medic replaced the seal on his armor wound. Across from him sat Kethar, silent, his blue eyes staring through the glass at the planet below, his home, now covered in smoke. Neither spoke for a long time. The hum of the ship's engines filled the silence like a heartbeat. Finally, Torres broke it. "You saved my life down there." Kethar turned his head slowly. "You saved mine first." There was no smile, no laughter, only quiet understanding. The door hissed open. Lieutenant Quinn entered, her uniform dusty from the cockpit. "Command's waiting," she said softly. "They want answers." Torres tried to sit up. "They'll court-martial me." "Not just you," Quinn said, glancing at Kethar. "They want him too." Kethar blinked. "Your people want to question me?" "Not question," Quinn said bitterly. "Blame." Hours later, in the cold metal chamber of the Human Fleet Tribunal, rows of officers filled the room. The flags of the Terran Alliance hung from the walls, and the seal of the Galactic Council flickered above the judge's table. Torres stood in chains. Kethar stood beside him unarmed, his wrists bound in glowing cuffs. A human official stepped forward. "Sergeant Elias Torres, you are charged with treason, direct disobedience of Fleet Command, and unauthorized engagement within Zath Dominion space." Torres said nothing. The official's gaze shifted to Kethar. "And this creature was your accomplice," the crowd murmured. Some officers whispered in disgust. Kethar looked down. He didn't understand every human word, but he could feel the hatred. Torres clenched his fists. "He's not my accomplice. He's my friend." Gasps rippled through the chamber. The judge, an old woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, raised her hand. "Sergeant, do you realize what you're admitting?" "I do," Torres said firmly. "I watched this alien save my men. I watched him pull wounded soldiers, human and Zath, out of fire. If that's treason, then I'll wear it proudly." The judge's gaze softened for a brief moment. "And what do you think this act of mercy accomplished?" Torres took a deep breath. It proved something the galaxy forgot. That humans still care, even for those who hate us. Up in the observation deck, news drones hovered, recording every second. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched. On Zath homeworlds, Kethar's face appeared on every screen. Some called him a traitor. Others called him a hero. After the first hearing, Torres and Kethar were separated. Human guards on one side, Zath guards on the other. Torres pressed a hand to the glass of his cell window. Across the hall, Kethar did the same. Neither could hear the other, but their eyes said enough. Outside, storms of protest began, both human and alien citizens demanding truth. How could humans, the so-called monsters of the war, save their enemies? How could a Zath soldier fight beside one of them? Something was changing, something the governments couldn't control. 3 days later, the Galactic Council called an emergency summit. Representatives from both species filled a massive ringed chamber above Juno Station. At the center stood Torres and Kethar, under guard. A Zath ambassador hissed, "Your human soldier invaded our world, broke our borders and corrupted one of our warriors." Torres replied calmly, "We saved lives, that's all." Another voice, human this time, shouted, "And you started a war that will cost millions more." The crowd roared. Through it all, Kethar remained still until he finally spoke. His voice was low, but it carried through the hall. "All my life I was told humans were monsters. I believed it. I fought because I was ordered to. But then I saw one kneel beside a dying Zath child." The room fell silent. He didn't ask who the child was. He didn't care about sides or history. He just saved her, and that moment changed everything. He turned.